question?
What kind of impact would the dredging of the St. John's, just a basic explanation of what kind of impact that would have on the St. John's?
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
I'm sorry?
Could you repeat that, please?
Oh, what kind of impact would the dredging of the St. John's have on the surrounding area?
I think, Quentin, you can.
Passing off. Part of what you got to understand is that we have currently dredged the river down to bedrock. And in order to go any deeper, we have to blast the river in order to take it out and give it deeper. And so what you're doing is effectively destroying the existing bottom, and a bottom that naturally would have been somewhere in the 8 to 14 feet depth is now going to be down 50 feet below light, dark, different kind of habitat totally. The other thing that's happening is you're basically enlarging the pipe that comes in from the ocean. When you look at the elevation of Florida, it turns out that the St. Johns River flows about 310 miles long, only drops 30 feet, but almost all of that fall occurs in the first 100 miles of the river. So when you look at the river, it's very, very flat. In fact, it's tidal. We see rise and fall with the tides south of Willatka. And so when you start opening up the river to more salt water, you've got an essentially unlimited supply of salt water to come in. Now, right now, under sort of normal conditions, St. John's has a salinity, let me sort of preface this for a second. Full-strength seawater we talk about as being 35 parts per thousand. That's just it's 3.5%, but scientists like to talk more in whole numbers. So 35 parts per thousand. Fresh water's 0 parts per thousand. Normal conditions, mouth of the St. John's, typically it's about 32, 35, sort of depends on how things going on. As you come up to Jacksonville University, we get a 12 to 18 parts per thousand right now. Yesterday it was 12. Last week it was 23. Rainfall south of us have a big influence in the salinity here because of the drainage. St. Johns River drains about 1/6 of the state of Florida, and that's almost 9,000 square miles. So we have all those kind of factors flowing through to us here. Well, because we're so flat, when you start opening up that borehole, it simply allows more salt water to come in. Right now, you get to the Buckman Bridge, it's fresh, by and large. A couple of years ago, during that severe drought that we had, we were seeing salt water at JU at 32 parts per thousand. We were seeing salt water at the Buckman at 12. We were seeing salt water at Julington Creek at 5. We were seeing the Vallisneria americana, which is the submerged aquatic vegetation we have there, dying because of salinity. The picture I showed you of the cypress trees in Julington Creek, probably when we dredge the St. Johns River and couple that with the proposed withdrawal of water, probably means those cypress trees will die. So we're going to see some significant environmental changes. The current ecology of the river will shift south. It's probably the best way to discuss it, or describe it.
And my question was, why don't we just modify the ships that come to the river? Wouldn't that be least expensive thing to
Money.
do? Well, it seems
Money.
like it would be least expensive compared to the dredging.
On the tidal issue, too, it's important to know what goes on beyond here. Normally, the tides push in all the way to Lake George. That's quite a distance, and that's, again, because that's such a slight gradient that's coming down from the headwaters of the river itself. But on the years when we have a particular drought in the upper river, down where the sawgrass and the marsh is, where we're not getting the rain there, and we don't have that water pushing up from the south, the tide will extend farther in because it doesn't have the resistance of the water. It will come all the way into Lake Monroe and go beyond Lake Monroe for maybe 20 or 30 miles. That's what's happening now. If a deep channel is dredged, that will bring more seawater in. I'm also wondering on the tidal flush out if it won't take out more fresh water with it. Have they studied it to that point?
That's part of the modeling that's going on. You understand, too, that salt water is denser than fresh water, so you get this tongue sort of extending up. So you'll get salt water further upstream on the bottom than you do on the top. And this is what Bill's talking about to some extent. So as you watch the push of the salt come in versus the lack of rainfall, or the lack of, if we have more water withdrawal. Because I think in some respects the withdrawal has potentially more impact because it turns the faucet off of the water coming down than the deepening because of the push of the salt water up. It has more to do with the water coming down than it does with the water going up. So it's this interesting balance. And I got here in 1976, and as Bill's pointed out on some of the books, there's very little written on the St. Johns River, believe it or not. And we're only really in the last 30 years have started understanding the river. And about the time we think we got something right, it does something, and you scratch your head and say, what the blank did that happen now? You know, and because sometimes it just doesn't make sense. You know, and sometimes you can begin to see things that do make sense. Last year we had an algae bloom, we had a fish kill, and it's interesting, and then you say, okay, bad thing. Well, this past spring, or in the fall really, we had one of the best shrimp runs that people have talked about in decades. Well, gee, fish kill, loss of big redfish, loss of big predators. It's the old food chain. Now I got a bunch of shrimp out there, okay? So it all sort of, it's interesting how these things sort of twist and turn, and we eventually begin to learn, oh, there is a connection. And some people say, oh, we had a great shrimp year. Yeah, but because of the fish kill we had last year.
Okay, one last question.
Who would be the kind of watchdog agency over the Army Corps of Engineers? I mean, with their track record, I mean, as soon as they say, hey, this is a good idea, there should be red flags jumping everywhere.
Yeah, part of the problem is they're from the federal government. They're here to help us, and I don't know where the pecking order comes. But when local government deals with state government, they think that they're the right authority, and when the state government has a deal with the federal government thinks they're the authority. And it's all got to be authorized by Congress. So that's the state of the affair. So there really isn't an agency that watches over them, except it comes from congressional mandates. And regretfully, sometimes Congress does what we want it to do, which is scary.
Bill and Quinton, we would like to thank you for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us this evening.